I want to talk about seasons this morning. Are you in that young, just got married season and looking forward to children and the whole of your life in front of you? Maybe in a season where children have left home and looking forward to grandchildren. Maybe you're going through a season of pain. Maybe there's a lot of sickness and debilitation. Or it could be that you're transitioning between one season into another. And you find that a little bit confusing this morning. I wonder what season you're in. It could be that we're at the latter season of our lives, looking forward to seeing Jesus. What season are we in? For everything, the preacher says, there is a season, a time for every matter under the sun. A time to be born, and there's a time to die. A time to plant and a time to pluck up what has been planted. A time to kill and a time to heal. A time to break down and a time to build up. A time to weep and a time to laugh. A time to mourn and there's a time to dance. A time to cast away stones and a time to gather stones. A time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing. A time to seek and a time to lose. A time to keep and a time to cast away. A time to tear and a time to sow. A time to keep silence. And there's a time to speak. A time to love and a time to hate. Time for war and a time for peace. What gain has the worker from his toil? I've seen the business that God has given to the children of men to be busy with, and he's made everything beautiful in its time. Also, he's put eternity into man's heart, yet so he cannot find out what God has done from the beginning to the end. I perceive that there's nothing better for them than to be joyful, to do good, as long as they live. Also, that everyone should eat and drink and take pleasure in his toil. This is God's gift to man. I perceive that whatever God does endures forever. Nothing can be added to it. Nothing can be taken away from it. God's done it so that people may fear before him. I don't know if you've ever read through and studied the book of Ecclesiastes. If you haven't, you're probably actually familiar with this chapter than any other chapter. It's the words of this chapter are used in various songs, different poems, in many different settings. They lend themselves to this sort of thing. Beautiful, beautiful words, isn't it? Words that becomes poetry, written by the preacher. Now we believe that to be Solomon. Remember, Solomon was a young king, and he falls into sleep. He's praying. He says, God, I'm just a youngster. I haven't got what it takes to rule this wonderful, vast army of people that you've given to me. So he prays for wisdom, and God gives him wisdom. And along with wisdom, God gives him everything his heart desires. But actually, the other writings of Solomon seem to contradict some of the phrases, some of the verses that we see here in Ecclesiastes. The Ecclesiastes, as you read through it, It's realistic. It's really gutsy. And this man, the preacher, this individual has seen it. He's been everywhere. He's done it. He's seen everything that goes on under the face, on the face of the earth, or under the sun, as he puts it. Yet he hasn't become cynical. He's not become sarcastic. And we get to benefit from his experience, his lifelong experience. He's the preacher. It teaches us about life. Life under the sun, as he calls it, it's often empty. It's very often futile. And the phrase he uses it's like you're chasing after the wind. It's elusive. You can't see it. When you think you're going to grasp for it, it's gone. This book seems so negative, and yet he's not depressed. It's because he sees life through a different perspective. He sees life through a certain lens. And that lens, actually the key to Ecclesiastes, is right at the end of the book. And whenever I read this last couple of verses in chapter 12, I get the picture of a high court judge. It's been a long trial, and now he's summing up everything that's been deliberated within his courtroom. This is the judge summing up. Now all has been heard. Here is the conclusion of the matter. This is chapter 12. Fear God, keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. For God will bring every deed into judgment, including everything that's hidden, whether it's good or whether it's evil. Although this book seems to be pessimistic, the preacher is not a pessimist. He's not a negative individual. He's a realistic man. And his goal is to demonstrate that life is meaningless unless it's lived for God, unless it's lived with God. Life is futile unless it's lived in the fear of God. Keep his commandments, he says. Enjoy life as a gift from him. This preacher, he's exhorting us this morning. He's urging us not to trust in anything in this life, to provide meaning and value. Don't to trust anything. Rather, we should trust our God and live the whole of our lives before him. That's where he's coming from. Now, chapter 3, he starts off with wanting you and I to think about time. Time is really important. You can see it in this chapter. There's an appointed time and a season for everything under the face of the sun. Every activity under heaven. And that's the key word there, time. In fact, in the first 8 verses, he uses it 30 times. It's got to be really important, time. Now, last couple of weeks I've been playing Snakes and Ladders. Ever played that game? And playing with Emily, actually. And you know how it goes. You've got to get a 6 to start off. When you get a 6, you get another go. And you move around the board. And if you land on a ladder, you can shoot forward. But sometimes you land on a snake, and right at the end of the board, just before, as you're coming home, there's this long snake that'll take you right down to the bottom again. It's horrendous. And to win or lose it all depends on what comes out of the dice. Just a shake of the dice. It's random. Is that what life's all about? Is it like a game of snakes and ladders? Solomon is saying timing is everything. And the events of our lives don't just randomly happen like a game of snakes and ladders or a game of chance. It's not like that. God has a purpose behind every event under heaven. Every event under heaven, we can see the sovereign hand of the great creator and loving God. Timing's everything. A good joke can crash with the wrong timing at the end. A meal can be ruined if you leave it too long in the oven. You don't ask a favor from somebody that's in a really bad mood and going through a difficult time. Somebody that's stressed, somebody that's angry. You wait till they're in a better mood. With investments, there's a time to buy shares and a time to sell shares. And here in this incredible chapter, Solomon, or the preacher's making observations. He's contrasting one event against another event. And he's asking us to weigh it all up. Now, the first pair of contrasts we see is birth on the one hand and death. Time to be born. And there's a time to die. It's 28 statements, 14 negative and 14 positive. Birth, death, and everything in between. Birth and death sets the parameters of our lives. Sets the parameters for my life and your life. And you know, if you go to a graveyard and if you like wandering around looking at the history and looking at the inscriptions on the tombstones, I love that sort of thing. You kind of wonder, you get this one date, born, death. What lies between? What sort of life did they live? Did they live it in the fear of the Lord? Were they Christians? Did they trust in the Lord? Were they fulfilled in life? Were they not? Were they happy for most of the time? There's a time to be born, the preacher says. And there's a time to die. God has appointed your birthday. It didn't randomly happen. And God has appointed the day that you go into eternity. There's no surprises in God at all. He's sovereign. And nobody can take your life. Nobody can snuff you out unless God allows that to happen. He's sovereign over life. And he's sovereign over death. He's the sovereign God. Same is true for trees and plants. He's saying that there's various seasons. Time to plant. Time to nurture that young plant. Time to see it grow. And then there's a time to uproot what's been planted. The seasons. Seed time and harvest. In fact, Genesis 8:22 says that while the earth remains, there's going to be seed time, there's going to be harvest, there's going to be heat, there's going to be cold, there's going to be summer and winter, day and night. And that's never going to cease. There's always going to be these seasons, one after another, while the earth remains. Why? God's ordained it. He ordains the seasons. Verse 3 is a time to kill. And there's a time to heal. A time to tear down and a time to build up. Now the Hebrew word for murder is rasah. And that's the word that's actually used when we read the Ten Commandments. Thou shalt not murder. It's not actually kill. There's a different word for kill. Now in this passage, it's the Hebrew word harag. And that means to kill or to slay. So he's not talking about murder, but there is a time to kill. There is a time to slay. He's not talking about murder. Time to kill and a time to heal. Now, God doesn't want us to murder another human being. We know that from the Ten Commandments. Yeah? Okay. But God's told us we can take a life of an animal for food. Genesis 9:3-4. Everything that lives and moves will be food for you, God says. Just as I give you green plants, now I give you everything. But we can't take a life of another human being. That's murder. We know that governments have been given a right to take life, and we call that capital punishment, a life for a life. An eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. And we know that there is a legal war and an illegal war. Justified killing when another country attacks a certain country and then that country defends itself. Both armies come together and there's slaying going on. That's a war. Time to tear down old buildings. Relationships, maybe. Even nations. Listen to this. Jeremiah 18. If at any time that I announce a nation is to be torn down, it's torn down. There's a time to tear down and a time to build up. Next to, he's expressing in 3 and 4 human emotions. There's a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance. Now we know both sorrow and joy are part of life, aren't they? Now I know we much prefer the seasons of joy, the seasons of sorrow. There's a time to mourn and a time to dance. But sorrow is part of life. Mourning is part of life. We don't do it very well in our Western culture. Over in the East, they do mourning. They do it very well. They do it for a correct time. But over here, death, it's just sanitized. We get somebody, take it away, just do that for me. And we don't go through that mourning process. And I believe there's a lot of angst and mental illness because we don't mourn correctly. Mourning is part of life. Joy is part of life. Jesus was an extremely happy man. He was anointed with the oil of joy, far above his fellows. And yet, he wept at the tomb of Lazarus. He wept over Jerusalem. He was in touch with his emotions, wasn't he? When John the Baptist died, when he heard about that, he went away to a lonely place and he mourned. It's reckoned that babies and children laugh hundreds of times a day. When you become an adult, we don't even break into double figures. That's sad, isn't it? No wonder Jesus says, unless you become like a little child, you won't enter into the kingdom of heaven. We need to laugh a lot more. We do. We need to enjoy life. And this is what the preacher's telling us. Life is meaningless. So why don't you just enjoy it while it comes? Recognize the season you're in. If it's a season of laughter, have a great laugh. It's a season of mourning, mourn. Whoever humbles himself like this little child is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. And actually, unless you become like this little child, you won't enter that kingdom at all. It's no wonder we're told in the Word of God to cast our cares, cast our troubles, give them over to Jesus, because he cares for us. He really cares for us. It matters to him. The stuff we go through in life, it really does matter to him. Why do we hold on to it? Proverbs 17, you know this one. A joyful heart is great medicine. Healing. But a crushed spirit, well, that dries up the bones. There's a time to laugh. When was the last time you had a really good laugh? I mean, a really good belly laugh that you just can't stop. When was the last time? Can you remember? When was the last time you saw a funny film? I'm not on about the English humor. You know, the stuff that we get on our tellies is just absolutely pathetic. Some of the American sitcom, the humor is a lot better, actually. But just to see a good, clean comedy, so you can just have a good laugh. It's good medicine. It does you good. Good with friends. Someone that's really funny. Tell a joke. Recall a funny story and relive it again. There's a time to laugh. You know, if you spend your time around children and pets, you've got to have a good laugh, haven't you? You can't take yourself too seriously if you spend a lot of time with children. There's this wonderful book by a guy called Jamie Buckingham. He's no longer with us, but it's called, the title is, The Truth Will Set You Free, but First It Will Make You Miserable. It's the collected wit and wisdom of Jamie Buckingham. Warning, it says, this book is for Christians and everybody else who takes themselves too seriously. Do you? Do I? Do we take ourselves too seriously? I recommend that book. You can still get it online from Amazon, and you can download it. And I guarantee you won't read it without laughing your socks off. It is such, because he's telling true stories about church life, and how bizarre it is at times. Well, chapter 3, verse 5, we come to what I can only describe as a bizarre set of lines. Solomon says, it's a time to throw stones and a time to gather stones. Now, what's that all about? Does he want us to kind of get a handful of bricks and say, hey, where am I going to throw some stones this morning? Oh, that greenhouse looks It's not what he's saying at all. He's talking about relationships. Now, the phrase to throw stones, he's talking about a man's relationship with his wife. It's a time of intimacy, to throw stones. And a time to refrain from intimacy, that's a time to gather stones. I told you it was bizarre, didn't I? Time to come together, and a time to refrain from intimacy within our marriage. Let me just say this to the men. Timing is everything. Yes? Timing is everything. Well, while we're on the subject of marriage, Ecclesiastes 9:9 is just a lovely verse here. It's a wonderful line set in a really bizarre verse. Enjoy life with the wife whom you love all the days of this meaningless life. I mean, all the days of this meaningless life that God has given you under the sun. All your meaningless days. For this is your lot in life, and in your toilsome labor under the sun. In other words, life can be wearisome, it can be full of toil. But you know what? If you're married, you've got a really good gift. And so we're to enjoy life with our wives. Now, it's not always easy. You've got to work at marriage. It's a relationship. It's there. It lasts a lifetime. A lot of giving and taking. You know, it's just not a marriage subject. But he does say, enjoy your wife. Invest in your marriage. Invest in the best. It's a time to seek. And a time to give up looking and, well, it's gone. Just got to write that off right now. Painful as that might be, we're not going to look anymore. Time to give it up. There's a time to keep and a time to cast away. It does you good when you have a good clear out, doesn't it? When you take things that you know you're no longer going to use, whether you take them to the second-hand shop or you can take them to the skip. But it's very meaningful. Time to cast away. There's a time to tear and a time to, and the word there is literally to sew, to mend, to put a patch on. There's a time to keep silence and a time to speak. Children learn this as they grow up. We help them, don't we? They always wanting to butt in on conversations. There's a time to love and a time to hate. Time for war and a time for peace. He's saying, listen, there's mountains and valleys within this life that God's given to us under the sun. There's great successes, but there's also times of failure. Times of failure and loss, when you have to give it up and write it off. In nature, we've got 4 seasons. But in your life and in my life, there's lots of different seasons that we go through. And the preacher, he's wanting us to recognize the season that we're in so we can make the most of it. Ecclesiastes 3:2-8 gives us a representation of all the different seasons and life experiences that we go through as human beings while we're alive. And yet, if we don't understand that there is a God and he has a purpose in it all, we're going to ask questions. We're going to ask the wrong questions. We're not always going to like the answers that we get. We ask God, why did you allow that to happen to me? God, why did you allow my marriage to fail? God, that time I was so sick. That time I spent in hospital. God, why did you allow that to happen to me? We see the outside. We see the wrapping. God looks on the inside. He sees the heart. He's looking at us from an eternal perspective. There is an eternity that one day we'll step into, and we're going to live forever. Saying what you do down here is so important. How you live your life down here is so important. Integrity is so important. God sees the treasure on the inside. He sees the intricate workings of our life and how our seasons are affecting us. He has that eternal perspective. He's working on eternity. There's this wonderful phrase here He makes everything beautiful in its time. Everything, everything. He's saying everything. He makes everything beautiful in its time, including a loss, including that hospital experience, including your failures, that brokenness. Those battles, your fragmented dreams, those joyful times, those meaningful times, your lost romance, your sickness, your heartache, your illness. He said, whatever you're going through, he makes it beautiful in its time. I don't get it, God. Without God, life is meaningless and profitless, purposeless. But with him, with God, ultimately it'll all make sense. It's like a tapestry. Looking at it from the back, you can see just twisted lines and it looks awful. But you turn that tapestry around and you can see the picture. God sees the picture. He sees the finished work. Sometimes we just look at the back and we just can't figure it out. It doesn't look very nice. It looks tangled and messy. And God has put eternity into our hearts. This wonderful phrase here, eternity into the hearts of men, it means that God has placed a big question mark within you and within me. Is this all it is? It can't be what life is all about. There has to be more. There has to be an eternal being. There has to be a God. There has to be a purpose. It's got to be more to life than this. You see, it means that we'll never be satisfied with the temporal. Never be satisfied with the insignificant. We'll never be satisfied with the trivial. Because there's an eternity within our hearts. And it's crying out for more. It's crying out for God. It's crying out for creativeness and meaning. We have an awareness that the passing seasons of life are part of something much greater, much bigger. And our short lifespans, it can't mark the whole of our existence. It can't. There has to be more. And there is. There's an eternity that stretches way beyond that death day. And in God, with God, we can live with him throughout that eternity. I had my eyes tested. Because a couple of weeks ago, I seen these kind of flashing lights. And at night, when I turn my head, it's like bright lights. And consulting Beryl there, and she said, could be a detached retina. Very serious. Very, very serious. Oh, yes. So I went to the opticians, and I told him I saw this lady seeing these flashing lights. Well, she did about 1,000 blooming tests on me. I mean, I was there for about 2 or 3 days. No, I was there for a good hour. And I had tests I've never had before. Really intrusive. At the end of the day, it's not a detached retina. Yes. Just your age. No, it was more than my age. I burnt my eye so many times because I was a fabricator welder in the steelworks, and it's very scarred and very damaged. She said that's probably what's happening. But you know what? There might be some sort of impaired vision going on with some of us, with all of us. And we can't see things from God's perspective. And everything looks gloomy and doomy because we're looking at the wrapping. We're not seeing what God's doing on an eternal level. in our lives. Do you recall a song sung a long time ago? The guy called Ray Stevens. Everything is beautiful. Remember that? In its own way. Hey, hey. Well, that's not true. Everything is not beautiful in its own way. Child abuse, it's not beautiful. War is not beautiful. Cancer, that's not beautiful. Ray Stevens is looking at these words in Ecclesiastes 3, and he really misinterpreted them. Everything is not beautiful in its own way. What God says, God has made everything beautiful for its own time. There's a big difference. God can take those dark things. He can take the negative things. He can take the losses. He can take the sickness. And in his proper season, he can turn it around for our good. Because he's working on an eternal perspective, not on a transient perspective. I think that's what Paul is saying in Romans 8:28. All things working together for good to those that love God, to those that are called according to his purpose. And so, you might be going through a season right now that's quite challenging, quite painful. You can't really understand it. It certainly doesn't look good. It's dark. It's painful. It's ugly. Maybe it's your health looks ugly. Friendships failing. Could be a lot of different things. But God can make something that's beautiful out of it in his time. That's why it's important to realize what season we're in. That's why it's important to enjoy life while we can, to make hay while the sun shines, to enjoy our marriages, to enjoy our work, even though it might be mundane and boring at times and hard. He's saying, listen, enjoy it while you can, while you're in this season. It's not going to last. There's going to be another season. You might be going through a time of transition between seasons right now. And those times can be really confusing. You're not one thing or the other. What's my purpose in life? Where's it all going? I just feel so meaningless. Come before God. Trust in him. Give it all to him. So the message is, enjoy life while you can. Laugh a lot. If you're going through a time of mourning, mourn. It's important. Enjoy. Find satisfaction in your work, whatever that might be. Don't moan about it. Moan about your boss, or your husband, or your wife. We're not going to do that. There's so many different seasons in life. Recognize this thing, that timing is everything. Timing is really important. We don't want to miss that. And for the men, on a nice day like this, if you feel like throwing some stones, go down to the riverside, get those flat little stones, you know, the ones that, and skim them across the water there. Watch them bounce. See how many times they bounce. Make the most of your days on earth. That's what he's saying. Find joy in the ordinary things of life. Can you do that? Can I do that? That is so important. Find joy in the ordinary things. Don't just keep looking for the next big wow thing to happen, because they only happen occasionally. Most of life is mundane and same old, same old. And he's saying, listen, enjoy those times, even though they're ordinary. Ordinary days have great value and glory in God. And if we're spared suffering and we're healthy, that's a gift from God. Glory in the ordinary, that's the message. But if we go through seasons of pain, and we will, seasons of loss, confusing times when it doesn't make sense, and we've sang it this morning actually, so I believe God's reinforcing this. When we go through times like that, we've got a unique opportunity to give thanksgiving and praise mixed with the pain. He said there's pain in the offering. That's what he means. Because when we get to heaven, there's no sickness up there, is there? We'll never be misunderstood. We'll never be late. We'll never be shouted at. Everything is great up there. But while we're here, we can give to God something that's so precious, something that's so unique, we can't do it in heaven. And that's mixing our angst, mixing our pain, mixing all those dark things. And we offer it to God. And our praise, our worship has that beautiful flavor and fragrance of brokenness and heartache and misunderstanding. What season are you in? What season am I in? Are we going through a time of transition? Let's just close our eyes a moment, shall we? And ask God for his wisdom. And tap into his loving care, his loving kindness. Oh, Father, we confess you are good. You're a good Father. And we just affirm, Lord, that you're in charge of everything. And we freely give ourselves into your hands, into your providential care. Knowing, Lord, that all things work together for our good. Because we love you. Because we're called according to your purpose. Now I pray, Father, for myself. I pray for my family. Lord, I pray for my friends here. Lord, as worshipers, God, give us wisdom to recognize the season that we're in. Help us, Lord, to give you praise, to worship you, to honor you in whatever season we're in. Lord, help us to enjoy life, even the simple things, the mundane, even the boring things. Lord, help us to see it from your perspective. And I ask that now in the name of Jesus for your glory, Lord. Amen. Amen.
It's my confidence is your faithfulness.
We are Burnham Community Church. You'll find us in Somerset, just 5 minutes from the M5 Junction 22. We meet on Sunday mornings at 10:30 in the St John's Ambulance Hall in Highbridge. Watch our website or follow us on Facebook and look out for our banner. Come along and check us out.